life is not a performance. Life is not an obligation. Life is not a dress rehearsal. Life is an adventure. And I contend that especially if you want to be an outlier in life, and if you want to live an exciting and meaningful life, you need to treat life like an adventure. And if life is an adventure, what attitudes do you need to take towards life? Imagine tomorrow morning, you get up, you pack your bags, you go to Hong Kong airport, and you jump on a plane, and you fly north for 6 hours until you arrive in Mongolia. Then you get off the plane, you take the bag, you jump on a train, you take the train into the middle of the Gobi Desert, get off the train, and then you take your bag and you decide, instead of catching a plane to go home, you're going to walk back home to Hong Kong. If you did that, what kind of adventures would you have along the way? What kind of people would you meet along the way? What kind of attitudes of adventure would you need in order to survive and even thrive along the way? Well, that's what I did just over a year ago. I left my home and my wife in Hong Kong. I flew up to Mongolia with a load of stuff, and I walked back to Hong Kong. It took me about 6 months, about 5,000 kilometers, around about 10 million steps until I finally got back. So today I'm going to tell you a few stories of what happened along the way, and I'm going to share some of these attitudes of adventure which I think helped me to get through it all. And I will also reflect a little bit on how those attitudes, I think, can help us with whatever our own personal adventure is in life. So this is the day I set off, that's me, and my friend Leon, who is also a professional cameraman, and we were making a TV show for National Geographic along the way. We jumped on the plane, we flew over the Gobi Desert. As I looked out of the window, I calculated in my head that for about every 2 minutes we were on the plane, it would take us about a whole day of walking, which rather put life in perspective. Next time you complain about a plane journey, think about that. And we got down to a little town called Sainshand in the Gobi Desert, which was our start line, and we packed our bags for the final time. We had a lot of stuff with us. This was a winter expedition, and so we had lots of warm clothes, tents, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, all that kind of stuff. Because we were filming it professionally, we had 2 big cameras, 4 small cameras, a laptop, 4 hard drives, a pile of cables, and a load of batteries. Because we were about to walk across a desert and there weren't very many 7-Elevens out there, we had to take 8 days worth of food and water with us, and hopefully we'd be able to resupply a little bit as we went. And all of that amounted to about 100 kilograms, which is like 4 times your check-in baggage, a lot to carry across a desert. And so actually now I have to introduce you to the 3rd member of the expedition, who was Molly Brown. This is Molly Brown. Molly Brown was our trailer. We loaded her up with stuff and we set off walking south into the desert. And my first attitude of adventure I wanted to share was that we need, on our adventures in life, we need to set ourselves specific goals. I needed, on this expedition, a long-term goal. I was trying to get to Hong Kong. It was great to have that as my ultimate goal. But if I only ever thought about getting to Hong Kong, that would be a very depressing thought on my first day. I had a very long way to go. So I needed medium-term goals. Where am I trying to get this week? And I needed a short-term goal. What is my goal for today? How many kilometers do I need to walk today in order to be on track for that grand goal? One of the great things about walking across a desert is that you can just camp wherever you like. You don't have to ask permission from the local farmer to camp in their field. You just put your tents up anywhere. And this was our 2nd night in the desert. And one of the daily routines we had to practice was stretching. Because I knew if I was going to fail on this expedition, one of the most likely ways I might fail would be if I got injured. And one of the best ways to prevent injury is to do loads of stretching. One of those small acts of discipline you have to do, because walking, especially when you've got a lot of weight, is very likely to injure you. And so that's my second attitude of adventure, is to practice the small acts of discipline. On the expedition, stretching was one of those key disciplines for me. But in normal life, I find I also have to practice really key disciplines. At the moment, I'm writing a book, and I find one of the most crucial small acts of discipline every day is to disable my internet before I start work. In fact, sometimes I even get my wife to hide the router before she goes to work, so I can't check my email. And that's a small act of discipline. It transforms how well I can progress that day. I'm sure there are ways you can think about that for your lives. If you're trying to study, maybe leave your iPhone at home, and so you're not checking your Facebook account every 5 minutes. And another thing, I suppose, more in a professional sphere, I found small act of discipline is things like courtesy. I found it's such a small thing, but it makes such a difference to working relationships. Things like sending a thank you or writing a thank you card to people when you should do. Small act of discipline makes a huge difference. Onwards we went through the desert. On our third day, we encountered these guys standing ahead of us. They're big creatures. We got a little bit closer. I saw they were Bactrian camels. And they weren't completely wild. They were owned by somebody, but they were being left to graze on their own. And as we walked closer, I said to Leon, why don't we walk through the middle of them? We can film, it will be great. And I grew up in a city, so I don't know a lot about animals. Leon grew up on a farm. He said, don't walk through the middle of them. As we got closer, we saw they were very big, and they were starting to stomp towards us, rather territorially. And so we took this wide berth, managed to get around the camels without getting trampled. Onwards we went, and then on our 6th day, the snow started to arrive. It was the beginning of winter. It was November time. It had been about -10 as we started going, which was endurable, but now the temperature was dropping lower and lower. It only snows twice a year in the Gobi, but it snowed in our first week, and the temperature now dropped down to about -20. If you're interested to know what that feels like, a little experiment you can do at home, just remember this now. You open your freezer door, put your hand in to get your ice cream out of your freezer. That's about -20 in your freezer at home. So imagine that, and then just imagine keeping your hand in there for about 6 months. And you're beginning to get an idea of a Mongolian winter. Actually, this is only the beginning of winter. It was going to get a lot colder. And there are all sorts of problems when it gets cold like this. Firstly, you just feel cold. You have to keep moving, wear lots of clothes. But there are other things. Everything starts to freeze. Our water bottles start to freeze. So when I was cooking, you can see I'm cooking here, we found our water bottles were frozen solid. We just had to cut them open and put the ice into the pan. And then I'd crunch up some instant noodles, put the instant noodles in the pan, and then I tried to put our tin of beef into the pan, but the tin of beef had also frozen, so I couldn't get the tin opener into it, and so it was frozen solid, so I had to put the whole tin into the pot, and then the instant noodles started to burn, and the ice started to melt, and I managed to open the tin of beef, which tasted and looked a little bit like dog food, and I put it in, and then the noodles were burnt. I mixed it up a bit, and so we had burnt noodles and half-frozen dog food for dinner. Great, but it filled us up. Inside the tent, other problems with the cold. Your breath starts to freeze onto the surface of the tent, the moisture, and then every time you turn over in the middle of the night, you get this kind of little load of ice falling into your face. Not very pleasant in the winter, but we had to keep going. We had to persevere. It was tough, it was cold, it was painful, it was exhausting, a bit frightening, but we had to keep going. And that leads me on to my next point, my next attitude of adventure. But before I tell you the answer to all your problems, I wanted to just reflect back on an experience I had when I was a student, about your age, in my summer holidays. I used to be a door-to-door salesman in America for my summer holidays, going around knocking on doors in California, trying to sell children's books to families in California. And as you can imagine, door-to-door sales is quite a soul-destroying job in some ways. You're knocking, lots of people saying, no thanks, not interested, no thanks, not interested, no thanks, not interested. And after I've been doing that for a little while, I just felt like sitting down on the pavement and crying. In fact, on one occasion I did sit down on the pavement and cry. It was so soul-destroying doing this. And my sales manager, I spoke to my sales